A NATO member's top diplomat just said something about China that they are not supposed to say out loud. He didn't just call them powerful, he called them unstoppable. And what he said next is the real reason Washington is panicking right now. Quick thing before we get into it. Drop the country you're watching from in the comments so I know where everyone's tuning in today. I actually read them. So there's a part of this Turkish foreign minister's interview that didn't make the headlines, and I want to explain it to you. Because once you understand what he was actually doing when he said this, the whole thing changes. This isn't just a compliment. It's not diplomatic flattery. It's a warning shot. Hakan Fidan sat down with CNN Turk. He looked at the camera and he told the world that China has become an unstoppable superpower. His exact words, China is an unstoppable superpower. He said the world has to face this new reality and build international relations accordingly. Now, ask yourself this. Why is the foreign minister of a NATO member state, a country that's supposed to be aligned with the United States, telling the world to bow to Beijing's rise? Because this isn't just about China. This is about Turkey signaling that the old world order is dead, and they're choosing their spot in the new one. Let me walk you through what actually happened in that interview. The stuff the mainstream news glossed over. Because once you see the full picture, you're going to realize the United States just lost something it's never getting back. Hakan Fidan isn't some random politician. This is a guy who ran Turkish intelligence for a decade. He was the head of the MIT, Turkey's CIA. He was at the table for some of the most sensitive negotiations of the last 15 years. He doesn't say things by accident. Every word out of his mouth is calculated. So when he says China's rise is irreversible and that the world needs to adapt to this new geopolitical reality, he's not commenting. He's dictating. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, a foreign official said something nice about China, so what? I get it. We see stuff like this all the time. Diplomatic backslapping, empty praise. But this was different. And here's why. Turkey is a member of NATO. They have been since 1952. They're supposed to be part of the Western Alliance. They host American nuclear weapons at Incirlik Air Base. They have deep military ties to Washington. So when their foreign minister stands up and says, China is the center of a new multipolar world, and the international community cannot ignore that, he isn't just making an observation. He's declaring a divorce. Let me back up for a second, because this didn't come out of nowhere. This has been building for a long time. And if you've been watching this channel, you know I've talked about Turkey's drift away from the West before. But now, it's official. Over the last few years, Turkey has been opening up to China and Russia in a way that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. They're applying to join BRICS. They're a dialogue partner in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Their president has publicly said the world is bigger than 5 meaning the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. That's a direct swipe at the US-led system. And then there was this moment last year. The leader of Turkey's Nationalist Party actually proposed a formal alliance between Turkey, Russia, and China. He called it the TRC Alliance. He said it would counter what he called the evil coalition of the United States and Israel. And you know what Erdogan said when he was asked about it? He said, "I hope everything will get better." He didn't reject it. He didn't distance himself. He just let it sit there. Now, that's the context. That's the water this statement is swimming in. And it tells you exactly where Fidan was coming from when he made this announcement. But let's get into the actual words he used, because the language is almost as important as the message. He said China is an unstoppable superpower. He didn't say rising. He didn't say emerging. He didn't say potential. He said unstoppable. That's a word that suggests inevitability. Like trying to stop it is not just difficult, it's literally impossible. He said China is playing a decisive role in the global balance of power. That means they're not just a player on the board, they're moving the pieces. And then the real gut punch. He said the international community must face this new reality. He said they have to build international relations accordingly. That's not a suggestion. That's an instruction. He's telling the United States, he's telling Europe, he's telling everyone, the old rules are over. The unipolar moment is finished. And if you don't get on board with China's rise, you're going to be left behind. Now, let me ask you something, and I want you to think about this. When was the last time a NATO foreign minister talked about the United States that way? When did we last hear an ally say that America's dominance was simply over? That the world had to accept a new center of gravity? Honestly, I can't remember. Maybe you can, but I can't. And that's what makes this so shocking. It's not just that Fidan said it, it's that he felt completely comfortable saying it. He wasn't hedging, he wasn't softening the blow, he just laid it out there, flat, direct, and final. And here's something else that jumped out at me when I was going back through this interview. Fidan specifically mentioned China's economic, technological, and military potential. He pointed to all three. He didn't just say they're big, he said they're growing fast in every category that matters. And he called Beijing a key center of power in the multipolar world that's forming right now. Let me pause there for a second, because that word, multipolar, that's the real story here. It's the code word for a world where the United States isn't the only sheriff. A multipolar world means different power centers, different rules, different alliances. And a country like Turkey, which sits at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, is perfectly positioned to play those centers against each other. And that's exactly what Fidan is doing. He's sending a message to Washington, he's sending a message to Beijing, and he's sending a message to the rest of the world. Turkey is no longer choosing sides between the United States and China. They're declaring themselves a side of their own, and they're betting that China's rise is the winning horse. Now I want to tell you something that might surprise you. This isn't the first time a Turkish official has said something like this, but it is the first time it came from the foreign minister himself, the direct voice of the state. Earlier this year, the head of Turkey's nationalist movement party floated the idea of a Russia-China-Turkey alliance. And a Turkish analyst actually broke down what that would mean. He said that if Turkey, Russia, and China worked together, Turkey could achieve 5 to 6% economic growth for a decade. He said they could be in the top 10 economies in the world by 2035. Think about that. A Turkish politician is openly imagining an economic future that depends on aligning with Moscow and Beijing, not Washington and Brussels. And that's not just fantasy talk. That's real geopolitical calculation. Turkey is already working with China on the Belt and Road Initiative. They've been integrating what they call the Middle Corridor, a trade route through the Caucasus and Central Asia, with China's infrastructure network. And just last month, the Chinese ambassador to Turkey said Beijing is ready to deepen that integration even further. He said they want stronger cooperation on everything from rail lines to nuclear energy. So let me connect the dots for you. While Washington is fighting trade wars and scrambling to contain China, Turkey is quietly signing up for China's new world order. While Europe is debating whether to decouple from Beijing, Ankara is doubling down on integration. And Fidan's statement is the public face of that shift. But here's the part that really bothers me. And I want you to think about this as a viewer, as an American, as someone who grew up believing that the United States was the indispensable nation. What does it mean when one of your longest standing allies, a country that has hosted your nuclear weapons for 70 years, decides that your era is over, that they have to adapt to a world where China calls the shots? That's not just a political shift. That's a psychological trauma for the entire Western alliance system. And it's happening in real time, right now, in interviews, in policy announcements, in the quiet decisions that get made in capitals around the world. The United States spent decades telling allies to pick the American-led order, to choose democracy, to choose free markets, to choose the Atlantic Alliance. And now, countries are choosing. And some of them aren't choosing us. Now, I'm not saying Turkey is going to cut off NATO tomorrow. They're too smart for that. They're going to play both sides. They'll stay in the alliance. They'll keep their American weapons. They'll keep talking to both Beijing and Washington. That's the Turkish way. They're master straddlers. But what Fidan did, and this is the key, he stopped pretending that China is just a regional power or a competitor. He upgraded them in public, in front of the world, on a major news network. He said China is the center of the new multipolar world, and that everyone needs to build their foreign policy around that fact. And if you're the United States, if you're the State Department, if you're the Pentagon, you have to hear that as a rejection, not of America as a country, but of America as the unquestioned leader of the international system. Because here's the truth that nobody in Washington wants to admit out loud. Fidan's statement is just one data point in a much bigger pattern. All over the world, countries are making their peace with Chinese power. They're not asking for permission. They're not waiting for an American counterpunch. They're just adapting. And that adaptation is happening on the ground, in trade, in infrastructure, in investment, in the simple fact that Chinese companies are building ports and highways and 5G networks while American politicians are arguing about, well, whatever they're arguing about this week. Look, I don't say this to be gloomy. I say this because it's real, and because the people who watch this channel, you deserve the full picture. Let's go back to Fidan himself for a second. This guy's background matters. I mentioned he ran Turkish intelligence for 10 years. He knows secrets. He knows threats. He knows what the United States is capable of. And he still said what he said. He still called China unstoppable. He knows exactly what the U.S. reaction would be. He knows Washington would be furious. He knows the think tank crowd would freak out. And he said it anyway. That's not carelessness. That's intention. He's telling the world that Turkey no longer fears American disapproval. And that, right there, that might be the most important thing of all. Because once a country stops fearing the United States, once they believe the alternatives are real, the entire structure of American power starts to wobble. I'm not saying the United States is finished. I'm not saying China has already won. What I'm saying is that the conversation has changed. And the people who used to be your reliable friends are now openly shopping for other options. And that, if you live in the United States and you care about your country, should worry you. Not because China is evil, not because Turkey is betraying anyone, but because the American-led order that you grew up with, the one that kept the world relatively stable for 70 years, that order is getting its legs kicked out from under it, one statement at a time. And Fidan's statement is a big kick. Now, I want to walk you through something else, because this isn't just about Turkey. It's about what Turkey represents. It's about the global South. It's about middle powers. It's about all the countries that used to be clients of Washington and are now becoming clients of Beijing. Or at least they're trying to balance the two. Turkey is one of the most important countries in this shift. They control the Bosphorus Strait. They sit on the border between Europe and the Middle East. They have the second largest military in NATO. If they drift out of the Western orbit, if they start genuinely aligning with China's vision for the world, that is a geopolitical earthquake. And Fidan just triggered a major aftershock. But here's the part I really want you to remember. And this is the detail almost every network is missing. Fidan didn't make this statement because he wants to be a Chinese puppet. Turkey is way too proud for that. He made it because he sees the United States and Europe losing focus. He sees them distracted by internal crises. He sees them failing to project power in the places that matter. And he's making a bet that the future belongs to whoever shows up with money and ambition. Right now, that's China. So what happens next? What does this actually mean for the rest of us? Honestly, we're in uncharted territory. The West has never had to compete with a rising power as strong as China. The Soviet Union was a military threat, but they were an economic basket case. China is different. They're a military power, an economic power, a technological power, and they're playing the long game. They're building roads. They're building ports. They're building relationships. And what is the United States doing? Fighting over debt ceilings, arguing about culture wars, turning inward? I'm not saying that to blame anyone. I'm saying that's the reality Fidan and other leaders are looking at, and they're making decisions accordingly. Here's where I land on this, and I want to know where you land. This whole thing, Fidan's statement, Turkey's drift, the multipolar world, it isn't a blip. It's a hinge point. Historians are going to look back at this period and ask, when did the post-Cold War order really end? And I think they're going to point to moments like this, when a longtime ally looked at the world and said out loud, the new center of gravity isn't Washington, it's Beijing. Now, maybe that's overstating it. Maybe I'm being too dramatic. But if you've been watching these videos, you know I try not to hype things up for no reason. I tell you what I see. And what I see is a world where the American brand is losing value. Not because America isn't great, it is, but because great doesn't mean dominant forever. And if you're a country like Turkey, you don't wait until the shift is complete. You position yourself early. That's what Fidan is doing. He's not just commenting on China's rise. He's publicizing Turkey's new position in the world. And that position, right now, is not on the American side. It's somewhere in between. Or maybe it's on the side of whoever can offer the most. The Chinese response to Fidan's statement has been interesting. They've been quiet. They don't need to cheer. They just let the statement sit there. They let the world absorb it. Because for China, this is free advertising. The foreign minister of a NATO country just told the world that their rise is unstoppable. What more could they want? The U.S. response has been, well, there hasn't been one. Not officially. They're probably still deciding what to say. Maybe they'll call Fidan in for a conversation. Maybe they'll express disappointment. But here's the thing. They don't have a counter move. Not a credible one. Not one that changes the underlying math. Because you can't talk a country out of believing that the future is China. You have to show them a better future. And right now, that's not happening. Let me wrap this up. I know I've been going for a while, but I wanted to make sure you understood the full picture, because this is a big deal, and a lot of people are going to miss it. They're going to see the headline, they're going to say, oh, Turkey said something about China, and they're going to scroll past, and they're going to miss the earthquake underneath. But you didn't miss it. You're here, you're paying attention, And that's the whole point of this channel, to give you the things the mainstream skips, the connections they don't make, the warnings they don't sound. So here's what I want you to take away from this. The world is changing. It's changing fast. And the people who pretend it isn't, the people who insist that the unipolar moment is still alive, they're going to be caught flat-footed. Turkey just told us that. And maybe, just maybe, we should listen. Because if a NATO member's foreign minister can say China is unstoppable on live television without fear of reprisal, then that ship has already sailed, and we're all just living in the aftermath. This isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning. We're going to see more statements like this, more countries declaring their own multipolar realpolitik, more allies hedging, more open discussion of the reality that everyone in private already knows. The only question is, how will the United States respond? Will they double down? Will they adapt? Or will they keep pretending the old world is still there? I don't have the answer to that. Nobody does. But I know the old world is gone. And the new one, it's being built right now. In interviews like this, in statements like these, and the people who see it coming, those are the ones who will survive it. I want to keep tracking this with you as it unfolds, because it's not just a story about Turkey or China. It's the story of what happens when America's allies start betting against America. And that's a headline none of us should ignore.